Welcome to our webinar on Data 3.0, kind of a product update and also positioning update on domain-centric semantic context for agents. So we're super happy to share with you what we have been working, we as a team, just to call that out, have been working on over the last months, and very excited to have all of you here from so many different time zones. I'm very amazed. And I think with that, we can introduce Zhamak. I don't believe she actually needs an introduction. She is the founder of the concept of data mesh, also the founder of Nextdata. So Zhamak, very excited to kick off this webinar together with you.
Same here, Jörg. We're gonna get us started, perhaps with a few slides to introduce the concepts. We use we use words that are perhaps familiar but maybe interpreted differently. So we want to introduce some of the context, and then I will hand over to you, Jörg, our head of engineering at Nextdata, to bring those concepts to life and show them in the demo. So with that said, let me just share my screen. Do you see my slides okay?
Yes, all good. Maybe
Fantastic.
just
Yeah.
one more housekeeping item. At any point during this webinar, feel free to ask questions in the QA. We're probably going to answer them consolidated at the end. We might pick up one or two in between, but please keep those questions coming.
Fantastic. I can see them already coming in. Great job. All right. So if you have been following our work, you might be already familiar with this kind of umbrella term, Data 3.0, that we use for a new approach to technology around data management. It is inspired by the kind of paradigm of data mesh, domain-oriented ownership of the data, and decentralized data management. But it is a representation of essentially a technology stack for data management. And it's contrasting and it's with Data 2.0, with modern data stack, which was, an attempt to decompose technology around data management from single stack to fit for purpose data applications that can be integrated to provide a data management end-to-end for enterprises. And it attempts to address some of those key challenges that we see with Data 2.0 modern data stack around speed of data to action, around suitability of data interfaces that we have available to us for agentic consumptions, around complexity of managing the data stacks and data pipelines that large enterprises face. On the left-hand side, maybe just as a quick recap of what we have talked about in the past. And if you're not familiar with these terms, with these umbrella terms or these concepts, I highly recommend checking out our website. Around, I think, end of October last year, we introduced and had a demo around it. Really, if you imagine kind of the current state of data technology and data architecture in a lot of organizations is centered around storage. Essentially, interface to data is a schema, is your warehouse, is your lakehouse, and everything else around it is accessorizing that storage. So on the left-hand side of that storage, you have built, pipelines that are moving data around through different stages of cleansing and modification to get it to the storage. And on the right-hand side of the storage, you have layers after layers to provide meaning for that data, to add metadata to improve understanding, to catalog the data to improve discoverability, to add context now to improve understanding by agents. But that introduces quite a lot of challenges around time from left to right, reliability of data, because a lot of these annotations happen after the data has already been produced. So reliability and trust that needs to be data. And then complexity of fragmented work and task that needs to happen. So in Data 3.0, we want to really reimagine data management from pipelines that move data around to autonomous applications that are built around domain concepts, business, truthful domain concepts, that each of those are managing the soup to nuts of from ingesting data, to defining the semantic, to enforcing the semantic definition of the business concept, to serving the data in different modalities, to providing access. Again, there are a lot of facets that go into that data to action that we want to automate, encapsulate into domain-oriented applications and abstract away a lot of data management complexity into an automated process. That's what we call autonomous data products, so that the interface to data is no longer storage. Interface to data is semantic definition of business concepts with their unified context and data living together served to agents. And this is particularly important because we're entering this era that instead of humans trying to kind of use their cognitive context that they have up here in their mental model and knowledge of the enterprise to find data, agents that have this really weak context be able to find the relevant data, trustworthy data, and then from intention plan actions and act upon it. So what would that look like? There are questions already in the chat. Okay, how does this fit into my maybe organizational structure? What you end up having is this maintaining your foundational infrastructure, such as your compute, your storage, your warehouse and lakehouse, really as a foundation for where the data gets stored, where the data gets accessed from, where the queries run, where the data gets processed, but abstracting that with an autonomous, domain-oriented set of applications that they interconnect with each other. They each represent a domain, again, encapsulation, each consuming data in the modes that fits them and serving in variety of modalities. I annotated this diagram, and that's kind of, that layer is what we've been building over the last few years with Nextdata operating system, and we would use the operating system in bringing some of those concepts to life. When we think about data 3.0, there are, when we were building this kind of operating system and thinking about the challenges of data 2.0, we arrived at 6 different axes for change to shift how data gets managed. And I just put these 6 axes here again in the October webinar. We touched on those to just articulate how we need to reimagine and then re-implement this new interface to data and new way of data management, from structural shifts, from how we provide an interface to data, from, again, schema first and storage centric to domain oriented and semantic first, from a modality shift, moving from imagining data as just files or tables to any of those, and MCP endpoints and APIs and vectors and all other modalities that yet to come to serve agents. We see a shift that needs to happen, how we have implemented discoverability. Discoverability has been implemented for humans. Again, what's one thing that we take for granted is the amount of compressed context that we have in our brains, and this quick planning that we do when we want to execute a task. So I can quickly, if I'm a customer service business owner in a retail domain, for me to get an intuition and insight about the performance of our products and customer feedback, I can very quickly intuit that I need to search for customer feedback, and from the customer feedback, I need to figure out what products that feedbacks are that for, and I can formulate a query to go and do that search. That's vastly different from agents that hardly have that causal relationship. They know the causal relationship between products and customer feedback. They lack the context to even go from an intent of, find the list loved products or contact the unhappy customers with discounts, to discover that they even have to search for customer feedback data in the first place. So from the intent to planning a search, to executing and taking actions, there are many steps involved in that planning that agents would naturally discover data very differently. Orchestration shift is another one. We have, imagine again, data management as a DAG master sitting outside and orchestrating movement of data. And that's, to me, is a very flawed concept when we think about these autonomous business oriented products, where each need to self-orchestrate and sense what they depend on, what they need to orchestrate, and how they need to process the data to arrive at that, customer recommendation, so customer feedback data product. Reasoning shift is a big one. Again, we humans do post hoc analysis of the data. Things go wrong. We look at the lineage to say where things, where errors happen. So we have a lot of this post hoc, post-mortem analysis. So we're very content with sprinkling kind of lineage on top of the data. And that's perfectly fine for the type of usage we've had for lineage, where for agents, they actually use the lineage in line in execution of a task to realize that, oh, there is a dependency between the two upstreams, between the product, where the customer has come from, or the customer recommendations, customer feedback has come from, to the customer feedback, to the fact that now I need to contact that user from the website, for example. That was the feedback coming from the website. So this is an inline execution. And finally, governance. Needless to say that the radius of impact when agents do something wrong is much wider in an organization when they use bad data. So governance, after the fact, that we've been very familiar with and content with, that you dump the data and then you get governance people to take care of it and make meaning out of it or add quality rules to it, is absolutely incomplete and irrelevant, where we need to have that governance in the flow of the data and living with the data computationally continuously applied. So this was a lot. What I really did today, when I get carried away because I'm so excited about these shifts, these 6-dimensional shifts that we see in Data 3.0. But what we want to talk about today and demo is really this structural shift. It was very fundamental to my work on data mesh and bringing data products to life, and remains relevant, but at a kind of a next level, and bringing that autonomy to it, which is really reimagining data as centralized, from centralized lakes with files or centralized warehouses with tables, to domain-oriented semantic. So when we think about the data, we think about these autonomous applications that each providing a business meaningful representation of data and functions and APIs. For example, the customer feedback, the customer sentiments, the channel-specific customer feedback. These are all business concepts that a customer success team member understands. These data products are designed to make customer success team successful with the KPIs that they have, which is happy customers, right, in a retailer. Why this decentralization matter? Because that's a layer that can scale without overwhelming the content for the agents. So they can just find the relevant pieces without getting overwhelmed with entangled, kind of files and tables. Domain orientation matter because the language, the logic, the meaning is encoded with the language of the business, not with the language of database and database normalization or denormalization. Semantic first matters because semantic, instead of getting interpreted, it's built in and evolving with the data. And that's when we can say, okay, we've got a ground truth for agents to take action. So just to bring this kind of concept home, I think whether you use humans to discover data and build the dashboards, or build a machine learning model, or use agents to talk to this autonomous data product, I think that a lot of good comes from this domain-oriented semantic first, the structuring of the data. But I want to call out the ones that are key, absolutely key for agentic consumptions and for AI consumptions. First, we are talking about explicit semantic. Not first, sorry for the typo, that really defines the truth upfront, and keep that semantic in sync with the data, no matter what modality that data is exposed, no matter that data, that customer recommendation or customer feedback is stored as vectors or stored at tables, it's the same semantic truth. as opposed to semantic interpreted ambiguously from the data. So when they see customer feedback over the last quarter, is that quarter a calendar quarter or is that quarter fiscal? They just have to like interpret that or infer that. Unified domain context, it's all of the context related to customer feedback together, not just silos of it. So the semantic definitions, the link, the data itself, the functions to query that data, the health of that data, the policies governing that data, all together, bundled together and available. The interface for agents is not a volatile schema layer. It's a stable data API layer that improves that kind of that determinism in the agent behavior as opposed to fragility of the schemas that they have to deal with. The next point around velocity, we will hammer this point, and it's been one KPI that as a company and as a product, as a team, we've been chasing, which is velocity of data to action. If the data products autonomously providing and generating the context that is needed, it's much faster to get an agent connected to the mesh of data products to answer a question or perform a task, as opposed to one team dumping the data and then another team picking up from there, try to layer metadata, another team picking up from there, try to define the semantic governance and others, which is essentially what's happening today, which ultimately leads to a very long lead time to data to action. And finally, I think semantic context, it's all meaningless if we can't dynamically generate and computationally verify it at the time of generation, not at the time of annotation. We have plenty of, data management or data product management technologies that annotate data with contracts or with other things, but unless that enforcement happens in the flow of the data at the point of generation, they're informative, but they're not changing behavior. I'm just going to quickly go over this. There's a great blog post by folks at LangChain that really define the fact that the more, I think this is a well-known now data point for everyone, that the more context you share, you actually get poorer performance by agents because they're confused. They don't have the relevant information that they want. And we really started this journey of agentic data, kind of supply with having nothing for agents, right? Back in a few years back with data agents that had no data to use that they could safely use. And we started with RAG and providing documents that they can interpret and use. So we, went through the phase of RAG being the most dominant way of getting access to agents to get access to information. And that's mostly around the documents in an organization. And now we're moving to a world where, if you want to have a customer success agent that is providing customer-specific answers for the products that they are using live, real time, you have to expose a lot of information, who the customer is, what product they are using, what problems they have in the past. And that means exposing a lot of structured data that you have in your warehouse and lake, and giving them a pointer to your lake or warehouse is definitely going to overwhelm them. So we use next context as a short term for what we think is an optimal window of context to share, and that domain-oriented dynamic context that is being generated by the agents is really the key. And for us, this concept of autonomous data product that is running, that is generating the data, really beautifully shares two sets of contexts together as part of the same domain semantics. So if you look at this diagram, you see that data products are bounded by a business domain, like here, customer success or customer feedback, whatever those domains are. And then they provide that as the data product runs autonomously and aggregates and classifies the customer sentiments, the data, the description of that data, the semantic definition of customer sentiment, okay, what constitutes customer sentiment, agnostic to the storage, what promises we're making about this customer sentiment, for example, being a cross-channel sentiment that we're providing, no matter where the customer came from. We always provide, up to date, down to the minute or down to the day, customer sentiment information, and so on and so forth. So that's a very powerful business context that guide the agent to plan their process to execute an action. And then on the other hand, as this data product runs, you see this life cycle of, it provisions its infrastructure, it autonomously ingests its data, it autonomously validates the data, it autonomously kind of provides discoverability for its own data and access. And all of that is producing rich, dynamic, real-time, up to the minute kind of data around operation of that data product, and that operational context is extremely relevant. So in the world of business, while we're building, either you're building business agents that are performing a business outcome, like call up the unhappy customers and make them happy, or improve the product, these aspects of the website or product, or you're building operational agents that are improving the effectiveness of your business or effectiveness of your technology. And both of those, in this case, are married together and served by these business-oriented data products that are running autonomously. So I want to pass to Jörg, who will be impersonating the CEO of this retail business and bringing some of these concepts to life as with Nextdata.
Thank you so much. Yeah, super excited to turn that into, or to show the reality behind it. Give me 1 second for sharing. So here we go. So as Zhamak already mentioned, for this exercise, I'm wearing the hat of being the Chief Data Officer here at Nextopia. Nextopia is an e-commerce company who just acquired a smaller European startup to expand into the European market. And now I'm actually faced with the task of integrating this new data into our existing mesh. Maybe just quickly, before we dive into integrating the data, let us quickly review why we want to do that. What is the value we are getting out of our mesh? And what is the value we are getting out of using tools against it? So here, I'm trying to zoom in a little bit. So probably on a day-to-day business, the value me and my team are getting out of it is we actually have agent ready usage of the data. So we can use any tool, as for example, Claude Code, or any tool just to access the mesh out here. Maybe let me quickly show the configuration. Here, this is something which just our NXD CLI is also generating. And you can see we are just having like one access point for the mesh. So that means we don't need to configure anything up front, no system prompts. It's basically out of the box Claude desktop to access our data. And then what do we use it for in the end? So we use it for, in the end, to ask, first of all, business questions, right? So our business teams, they can ask questions, for example, what are our different sales channels? And we can see the tool is tools being identified here, sales influence insights, discovery, and then based on this data, we can actually answer business questions without having to know SQL, without having to go down into the data and explore that further. So I think this is really helping our business teams out here. I can also do more. I can also ask questions about the mesh itself. So for example, what data products are available in my mesh? And this also helps me to explore. So it's not only that the data product data is available, but also data products and domains. For example, we can access that at this level. And this is not just us as humans, right? The same access is available for agents. So it's really helpful for them to discover what domains and then also what data products are in those domains are accessible. Maybe even more important, this is kind of like a nice to go in because we could also search for it manually as humans. But I said, like, for agents, this is a bit harder. And then the other part, which is accessible, is also the metadata for this. Let's zoom in here for a second. And this is, for example, which data products have been accessed in the last 7 days. So for me, I want to figure out what is the metadata about those data products, right? I think this is one of the value propositions. Nextdata brings together those access statistics like across all different technologies. It doesn't matter what you use underneath for your storage, across the different domains. And it actually allows me to choose which data products I can use reliably, and B, I can also leverage that for going into choosing data products based on usage. So if I want to establish, for example, the value of different data products out there. After having said that, let's quickly zoom out and go to one particular data product. So we've seen the value we are getting from it. Let's actually see what is driving this value behind it. We have seen the multi-channel sales data product being used in our queries before. So let's actually take a look at it. Usually, the first thing when I'm looking at a particular data product is I'm looking at kind of the lineage Zhamak already mentioned before. So what data products it is consuming data from, and what other data products are using it from. So here we have 3 inputs, and we actually have like one data product consuming from it here on the right, which is sales value. So sales value is kind of a downstream data product consuming from us. I think the next most important concept is that we can also reference global vocabulary information. So for example, here, and we'll dive into that into more detail, we have our e-commerce glossary defining a well-established business vocabulary for our entire domain, actually not just for this one data product. Then if we keep on going and look at what a data product offers otherwise, I think one really important aspect, it is a running process. It has started, it has last been updated, and it continuously goes through the data product lifecycle. We can also see who has actually written that data product, and we could, for example, contact the owner here if needed. Then if we go further down, I think the next thing to look at is the semantic model here. So in this case, maybe just to recap, we actually have 3 different models inside this data product. They're usually models which are very well grouped together. And I would always say they are the models which are being updated together, so which share the same life cycle. And if we now look at the data part of this model, the data model part, we can see, first of all, the different attributes, kind of the easy part being used. But we can also see, if we go further on the right, we can see those glossary definitions here. So as mentioned earlier, we'll deep dive into that a little bit, but maybe just to give a quick preview, this is kind of the shared vocabulary we can use within our organization, within our domain. That might actually be different between different domains out here. Then we also have semantic links. So semantic links is, for example, same as defined to other data products, to other models of data products. So we can see that same concept being used in other data products, which often helps us to really understand that semantic lineage in our data mesh, just going beyond one individual data product. Furthermore, if we're talking about the semantic model, we also have API functions available in that model. API functions, I would always explain, are the questions the data product can really answer well. So we as humans, we might be really good at looking at that model and say like, oh, this is a question we can answer. But on the other hand, it's really hard for an agent, as we see here on the right, to figure out what data product and how can it ask those questions. Should we just dump in all the data? Or here we actually give a more fine granular way to tell it, these are the questions you should actually reach out for this API function, which in this case is implemented by an MCP endpoint, for example. So this is something adding like semantic value on top as well. Another part of semantic value, also the promises. Promises is what I, as a data product, promise all of my downstream consumers and they can rely on. As you can see, this is actually computational verified, so you can see the one succeeding, and it's continuously done, meaning if that fails, I stop promoting my data, and so no one is going to consume bad data out there. And again, this is something, for example, an agent or also human can rely upon. So for example, our sales value data product over here. Then talking about agents or different consumers, the other parts are the different outputs. So we talked about the conceptual semantic model here. It's actually available in different physical representations. So in this case, we have a BI output. So this is the BI on Snowflake, people accessing it on Snowflake. We have a vector embedding output, for example, for agents to consume the data, or chatbots, so anyone who actually needs semantic vector representation of it and doesn't just want to grab the main data. And we have our iceberg output, which is our data lake output. I actually believe there was a question earlier on that, so I think that also still fits in very well into the concept. And then, as mentioned earlier, we also have our MCP output for the API functions being available. After having seen and hopefully gone into some details of an individual data product and how it connects to the questions we could ask over there, let us maybe zoom out a little bit to the entire mesh. So in that mesh, we see kind of like here those bubbles. Those bubbles are representing our different business domains and subdomains. So here, sorry if it's hard to read, we have our retail domain, and then we can have a sales subdomain as part of that. So these domains, they are first of all a logical grouping for the data products, but they are more than that. They also help us to group the infrastructure access. So for example, the finance domain is going to have very different infrastructure services and data available than the marketing domain. And probably this is also good. And similarly, it's also a way to group kind of permissions and access across those different teams. So right now I can see all those domains because I'm in an administrator role in this mesh. But if someone is just in a marketing domain, in an HR domain, they probably can't see the entire mesh. They will only see a subset of that entire mesh which they have access to. And this is the same. We now just talked about humans, but this is the same for kind of agents being out there. Agents, it's actually even more important, as Zhamak already mentioned, like what do they have access to, both from a permission perspective to not share information we don't want to share, but also from a perspective that we don't want to overload them with simply too much information. And here, for example, share that sensitive information, which shouldn't be leaked to any LLM, because it's really like our crucial company information out there. All right. With that, I would actually maybe quickly switch back out here and stop sharing for a second. And I think that kind of concluded our overview of the mesh and individual data products. So I hope that kind of was like a first glance or a recap, if you have followed us before, of autonomous data products, domain-centric mesh concepts. But happy to also get like more questions. Keep those questions coming in the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe before jumping into kind of the next demo, there were a few questions coming in the chat that maybe folks that are newer to our product that were trying to grok what is it that we're looking at. So maybe just to clarify that, what you see here is it's just really a surface UI that is showing runtime information coming from independently running data products. I realize my video is very glitchy for me. I don't know what it is for you guys or not, but essentially runtime information, every one of those hexagons that you saw is a running application with Nextdata OS as its kernel inside it. And each of those is consuming data, orchestrating, running transformations, sharing data, and dynamically through APIs, sharing their metadata, such as their health information. If you remember that circle that I show on my diagram, it showed different life cycle stages. Those are the life cycle stages of a running application. And when you have many of those and they're interlinked and they link to each other, that mesh emerges. So when you see a function on the data product, like the MCP, that endpoint that Jörg referred to, that is could be a Python function, it could be a SQL function that is defined as part of the data product user kind of assets that we package and then we run, and then we expose the kernel of that particular data product exposes as an MCP endpoint, and the rest of that UI is just talking to the control plane of our OS and getting information about individual data products. All right, so shall we maybe show a quick way to build one of these data products and see how that semantic richness and enriching the semantic can improve the behavior of a simple agents, which I know for simplicity of demo, we're just using Claude Desktop to show there's no extra magic. It's just Claude Desktop connected to your mesh.
Yeah. As mentioned, I showed like hands-free. I actually showed the configuration. There's no magic. I tried to tweak a little bit my settings. Give me one more second. Of course. Apologies for that. I'm trying to make it better visible. And of course, Zoom doesn't like that. All right, we'll revise that a little bit. And kind of start out here. All right, so as mentioned, like next step for us is actually to build a data product. For that, we have a co-pilot, which is Nextdata. And the first thing we want to do with a Nextdata is actually build a data product, right? It's going to ask us. So first thing we want to do is build that data product. And we can kind of already see that screen here on the right, which is kind of like our wizard. It will guide us through in terms of building that data product. So usually the first thing we start with is a semantic model. And here it's asking us for kind of like the source to that data. And this can be anything. This can be a database, anything being updated. And this is just used to seed the data. I think it's just really important to keep in mind that it is not just only these attributes here. We can already see this is actually a pretty good list. Usually you need to like iterate a little bit on it, but here it actually came up with a pretty good list. The other thing, in addition to just the data model we talked about, is the glossary terms. It actually identifies that there is a glossary available in this domain, responsible for this domain, for example, used by data products in other domains. And so we can go in again, and here, for example, it suggested the transaction date. This is in particular important because recall what we are doing right now. We have this new entity, they have some data, and we need to merge that data they have available with the data we have. So it is really important that we use the same vocabulary. And we, for example, do that here with region, we do it with the unit sold, and Nextdata is really helping us to kind of like dive in there. We actually know that there is additional special semantics we have. For example, like our fiscal year is not following a regular calendar year. So if we're using anything with dates, it's really good to reference our quarter definition. As said, like not following a normal fiscal year, but incorporating for seasonality. So our Q1 is from February to April. And this is just something which can't be represented in that normal schema table, right? This is additional semantic information we give to this attribute. So first of all, a human consumer, but also any like agentic consumer can leverage that and rely on it, and we'll actually see what that does. Next thing we need to do, we're going to give it a name, sales transactions, and it should also live in a particular domain. So the thing we'll probably do next, should do next is it should live in the retail domain. For now, we'll move it to the retail EU domain to make it specific that this is our European market as a subdomain. Great, we have done that. And this is actually getting us closer to where we want to be. Next, let us add the description of the data product. Great. And then we are almost ready to launch. Let's do like a quick review out here. It looks all good. We have our inputs defined, and as said, this can be input which is continuously updated. We have our outputs defined, and we also have a basic data quality check. So this is maybe something to note, that Nextdata, it will generate a very basic version of that, but it's a good starting point. So typically what will happen afterwards, we will have our data engineers probably add like some more promises which we know about. But as said, like it is a really good starting point, so we can actually get started and launch our data product. Here we see it launching. And with that, let me just quickly jump back and show you then how we can consume this data product as well. 1 second for that.
Maybe super quickly, how the data products are everything as code, right? The transformation, they're a package of essentially code as well as configuration that then the OS runs, and the kernel of the OS empowers its life cycle as it runs. For example, enforcing those semantic models to match the data at runtime. Every time the data, before data gets promoted by this sales transaction, its semantic is enforced. So we just wanted, for the demo purposes, we just use this Copilot experience or this more conversational experience. There are other experiences for building it, and it's a super simple transformation sitting behind this that is, I believe, is just making the data available on Databricks, right?
Yeah. So I think this is one of the other aspects, where it's very iterative, but I think this is also, this is something which is quite important for me. I think I think about data products, it's actually an evolving product, right? We have product managers who make sure that they evolve. So it's not just a static asset by itself. First of all, it has a lifecycle function. So it's continuously keeps updating itself, plus the metadata surrounding it. But also it keeps evolving over time if our business requirements change. So there's actually an evolution and different versions of data product out there as well. Okay, with that, let's actually jump in and use it. So again, we kind of have our Claude desktop here, my personal tool of choice. But as Zhamak mentioned, we can use anything else out there. And let's just take like a quick look how we can start leveraging this new data product here from our consumption. As mentioned, we don't have to change anything on the Claude Code side. Because we are connected to the entire mesh, and we can start asking questions. I gated it a little bit because I really wanted to make sure we are hitting this data product. And what we are seeing here right now is revenue breakdown for this channel. And the one thing we see is actually like, oh, it only took up Q4, so October till December, which we know is not our quarter as we have defined it. So we actually can point any LLM tool back to it. Maybe just kind of as a quick disclaimer, I actually had to tweak the demo a bit to first have this issue, but I just wanted to show, like, without the additional glossary information, we actually get wrong or misleading results, at least, because we are not using the glossary. So Now, when we repoint the LLM explicitly to it, it's actually choosing the right quarter. So Q4 is November till January 26th, and we are getting the outcomes we want. I think for me, this is kind of like the one thing where we really show having additional information, having additional semantic value available is really key to getting good answers out there, because otherwise, again, recall we just imported that data set into our mesh from that entire entity we took over, and they might have different definitions. So kind of coming up with this match of semantic value in our language, in our semantics, is a really key aspect in this process. All right. With that, we just built our first data product. We just create our first data product, and I didn't time this right now, but I believe this was kind of like 3 minutes. As mentioned, just to set expectations, this is leading us to kind of the first workable version of a data product. Typically, then it will kind of like evolve from there with more and more functions being added. But as said, I think especially also for non-technical people, it is a really great fast starting point.
Yeah, and I think it's again we chose extremely simple examples so that an audience who's new perhaps to the platform and new to the concept can reason what the Claude is doing behind the scene, and just seeing a simple enhancement of a data product itself with defining the terms as part of its semantic, and defining the data model, adding the questions. You can get out of trouble, right? Get out of trouble misunderstanding what revenue means. As simple as it can be, revenue in Q1 from January to March, or revenue in Q1 from February to April. So, but you can imagine that how this can become quite difficult, where an agent needs to plan a multi-step process and contacting different and multiple data products to aggregate information itself, which is also another fascinating use case when you have these well-bounded semantic definitions of your data products. All right, so I think we covered some of the business examples. Do we want to cover any operational?
Yeah,
I think do that. Okay.
Now I can actually jump into, I would say, like my main role, right? As Zhamak mentioned, I think we covered like some of the concerns or kind of interface business people might drive here. Still, I as CDO, or I as a platform owner in this case even, I might have slightly orthogonal other concerns more from like a platform level. So let's maybe dive a little bit into these concerns. And I think first and foremost, when I wake up in the morning as CDO, what I worry about is how can I keep data safe, right? We saw it's really easy for people to bring in new data products into the mesh, but how can I make sure that they are not leaking either our company secrets or really sensitive information out there, which would bring us into a lawsuit because we just leaked PII data. And one important concept supporting me in doing that as a platform owner is a concept called policies. Policies are globally scoped. So I can just say this actually applies to the entire mesh. This applies to just a domain. So they might actually be varying between different domains. And I can say certain rules need to be followed in those domains. And one example, what happens if those rules are not followed, you can see here with the sales influence insights. It has actually failed. And you might have wondered about it in the demo before. And let's take a look at why it has failed. If we scroll down, we see 3 different policies. 2 of them are succeeding. Keep in mind, this is continuously being evaluated, but the last one is actually failing. And this is a very important one. This is our PII attribute protection, where we make sure that we are not leaking certain PII data into the output of that data product or outside of our domain. If we look through the events, again, all of this is event driven. We can actually see that event failing. Let's quickly scroll through. And here we already found it. It says the attribute product ID in jail channel velocity is sensitive and shouldn't be leaked. So we have an attribute which has a semantic marker that this is sensitive and it is not covered by one of the PII promises. So this is actually causing the data product to fail, meaning it won't run, and also meaning it won't be consumable down there because we don't want to leak that information. In certain cases, we can also set the so-called consequence to just a warning. But in this case, because leaking PII information can be really sensitive, we really want this data product to be read. Let's actually just quickly fix that in the background by deploying a new version which has actually fixed that. And while this version is deploying, I think we can explore some other task I might leverage the semantic layer for. Yes, jump over here again. And some of the questions I might, for example, wonder about is, one second, here we go, is, for example, like find data products using the quarter term we have seen before outside of the finance domain. So what do I want to do here as a platform owner or as someone like owning that data? I want to see like this semantic concept of quarter. Is it used just in one particular domain, or is that data usage actually being used across different domains? Does it kind of like permeate other domains as well? And I think this is something we've been often seeing, like once there is a domain with first data products established and data products which are accessible outside of that domain, we can actually, it really is kind of like a bootstrap for that entire mesh. So in this case, we found some data products outside of the finance domain using the quarter term. So for example, here in retail sales, we see a number of them, and Claude Desktop still keeps mapping it. But overall, again, it picked up our weird definition of quarter, but we see it like through different domains from mostly in retail, this being used as well, which also makes sense. Another question I might ask is what models don't use any glossary terms? So kind of the business or the operational concern I have here is, are people actually sticking to glossaries even though we have not defined them? We could also establish a policy enforcing that. But I first want to know, is this actually, do I need to do that? Or do people stick to the shared vocabulary? Or might they come up with their own vocabulary? So this is a tool for me to actually explore how do those disjoint, decentral teams build the different data products. For example, here in transportation, they might build something different as in the product domain. Last but not least, and this is coming back to that first question I was having, is what data products have PII data and no PII promise protecting them? So here we really jump in. I suppose it's going to take a bit longer because it really has to accumulate a lot of information. Here it even Claude Desktop or the LLM tries to be really smart and access each individual endpoint of a data product, which I think is also important to mention. I can share each data product is coming with its own API, which of course Claude doesn't have access to because it only has access to the mesh level metadata. But if I, for example, want to share a data product with Zhamak, I can copy that link and I can share it. And here we just identified certain data which might be at risk. So this is definitely something I, as CDO, would kind of have to follow up on and encourage the teams to follow the good examples down here where it is actually protected by those PII promises. So maybe just to wrap up why this is actually more important in a world where agents are continuously consuming my data. I really want to make sure that I'm not leaking data or I'm not making that accessible to those consumers, because first of all, they don't have a judgment functions to go in and say like, oh, I shouldn't do this. On the other hand, just the velocity of access by those systems is at least an order of magnitude higher compared to human consumers out there. All right. With that, I think we kind of like covered that journey from autonomous and agentic AI-ready data products over building one of them to actually me as a platform owner being able to manage an entire fleet of them and providing value to the entire business.
Thank you, Jörg. I know we only have 4 minutes. I wanted to maybe emphasize one point that may not be very clear. All that we showed, one can imagine done in an annotation tool like a catalog. You can go and annotate your data. The difference is there is no reliability and trust in something that is after the fact annotated to something that is actually being enforced consistently in the flow of the data. So when Jörg ran that policy or show the policy being failed, that policy is being failed because or that policy is passed because that running data product that is producing fraud detection information actually encapsulates its semantic and its data and the code that is producing that data together and continuously enforcing validation that as of those policies as code in the flow of its life cycle, which is very different than data got dumped and somebody annotated whether it's PIO or not, which is more of a I don't know, performative function that we've been doing and feeling comfortable about to some degree for a while. We have 3 minutes. I tried to answer as many questions as I could.
Yeah, sure.
Let's try to answer a few.
Yeah, I'm seeing like a really large number of super interesting questions. So, for example, here one of them, which is actually a perfect question for you, Zhamak. If semantics aren't defined centrally by domain, continue to see concerns that a decentralized approach will lead to more semantic silos and lack of consistency. Any recommendations on how to address or some centralization by domain required?
I think you just showed that. You actually just showed that because you see, these domains are not in silos. These domains have a standard way of producing data products, and that standard is providing a container for them to build their own semantic as they wish in however they wish. But the moment that they deploy that semantic, they deploy that data product, that semantic is becoming visible across the organization where governance, like Jörg showed, can actually run real-time policies to detect and run agents, these operational agents that can detect data products with similar semantics. And following that detection, you can automate calling that owner. The owner of the data product who wrote the code who launched the code is associated with that code. You can contact that person and inform them that there's duplication here. So that standardization of a data product as a container that we have done is incredibly powerful to give the global visibility without really trying to enforce control to be in the way of people.
I always see those policies more kind of like as a guardrail. They actually guide me, right? So if, for example, there's a policy that I have to use glossary terms, it's actually a good reminder function that I should do that. So often it helps me, and it also helps especially co-pilots like Nextdata to deal with that because we actually constrain the interface and the problem.
Yeah. Before we leave, Jörg, I want to ask audience a question, and you can leave it in the chat. We are going to have a bunch of webinars around this kind of structural and modality shift, or discoverability shift, and demo how that comes to life with Nextdata OS. Can folks, before you leave, write a little note on the chat which one of these you like to see in the next demo, and we make sure we cover that one first.
I mean, the one where I see a lot of questions and also just my personal background just draws me to is this kind of the question around graph ontologies, taxonomies as part of the semantic layer. I think I just personally would be super excited to have one of those, to give one of those.
Which becomes really important in discoverability shift, I believe. Okay, I think this is a wrap, or do we want to take one more question? I know we are over time now.
I think what we could do is we could actually follow up with a blog post capturing all the best questions. How about that? I mean, I'd love to see all those questions coming in right now.
Fantastic. All right. Well,
Okay.
this is it for us. Thank you, everyone from Melbourne and Australia for waking up early, to folks in Europe, Turkey, and Germany and other locations, to going to bed late to join us here in California.
Mm.
We'll see you very soon.
Thank you.